As we hurtle through these last chapters of Deuteronomy, there's an urgency to the instructions that Moses provides to the Israelites about how they should live when they reach the land they've been promised. This week, we receive a series of guidelines about how to create a just and compassionate society, one that allows for the dignity of every human being, particularly the least fortunate. We learn that if we're walking through someone else's vineyard, we can eat as many grapes as we want, but we can't fill up our bag with them. Take what you need, the text suggests, but be a mensch about it. And on the flip side, we're told that when we harvest grain or olives from our fields and we accidentally leave some of our produce behind, not to go back and get it, but to leave it for those who are in need. Later, we learn that if a person has nothing to his name but the shirt on his back, and he offers us that shirt as collateral for a loan, we have to return it to him at sundown so that he will not freeze overnight. We're not allowed to prioritize the concern for our property over his life. These verses recognize that even in the land of milk and honey, there will always be people who don't have enough. There will always be widows and orphans and strangers who have no family or community to provide them a safety net. Sometimes we will be the ones who need to grab a few grapes from someone else's field. And sometimes we will be in a position to conveniently forget a sheaf of wheat to be found by someone who needs it more than we do. Fundamentally, these commandments are about preserving the dignity of the human beings with whom we share our communities, whether they are longtime residents or strangers. Even if we would be entitled to take their garment overnight, we don't. And even if we could shake every last olive off the tree so they would have to beg instead of taking what they need anonymously, we don't. There's no shame in having more than someone else, but with that advantage comes obligation. I live on the Upper West Side. And if you've been reading the papers lately, you may know that our neighborhood is embroiled in a heated debate. Several weeks ago, in order to move people who were homeless out of crowded shelters where they were at greater risk for contracting COVID-19, the city transferred them into empty hotels in our neighborhood. We were several months into the pandemic by then, and the neighborhood had already changed a great deal, with shuttered storefronts and anxious neighbors avoiding each other on the street. And now here was this new, unfamiliar population sharing our space. Some, but not all, of these people suffer from mental illness or drug dependency, and their behavior has been distressing to people whose nerves are already frayed. I'm not here to talk about whether the city's choice of housing was right or wrong. If Rabbi Rosenthal declined last week to weigh in on whether schools should open in person, I am certainly not going to take a stance on this policy question because it is multifaceted and complex. But I do want to talk about where we go from here. The reactions of my neighbors to our new arrivals span a wide range. Some have delivered cookies and notes of welcome to the hotels. Some of us have done nothing except put our heads down and go about our business. Some have appealed to public officials to address concerns about sanitation and public safety, which feel all the more pressing in the time of a public health crisis. And sadly, a few have hijacked community forums to lash out, suggesting that people run over these homeless people with their cars or spread feces on park benches so they will have nowhere to sit. This small but loud minority have taken to referring to these strangers in our midst using dehumanizing terms like convicts or junkies or even vermin. One suggestion offered by well-meaning neighbors, which seems reasonable on the surface, is that these people should not be housed in neighborhoods that have children or elderly people. But upon reflection, one has to ask, are there neighborhoods without children or elderly people in our city? Knowing the answer, where do we go from here? What I hear when I read comments like these is fear, because this is a scary time. Our whole world is in some ways unrecognizable, and we don't see an end in sight. We are primed to fear the worst, and we deserve to live in safety. But so do these strangers who have now become our neighbors. If these recent events can act as a wake-up call for us, let it not be a siren that instills fear into our hearts. We rarely make our best decisions out of fear. Fear causes us to turn inward and to grab on more tightly to what we have. Instead, let it be a shofar blast that helps us turn outward toward one another, reminding us that we're not alone. More than ever, we are all in this together. What unites my neighbors across the spectrum is a realization that the society that we've built has failed to care for our needy brothers and sisters in a way that ensures not only our safety, but also theirs. Let this moment, when human suffering that we may have previously ignored has come to light, open our eyes to the work there is to be done. The moratorium on evictions that has preserved housing for many New Yorkers is set to end soon, and the financial repercussions of the crisis are still building. In the weeks and months to come, we may find more of our neighbors in need of shelter or food. This is our chance to get it right, to create a community where instead of looking after only our own interests, we prioritize the needs and dignity of everyone, however much or little they may have. So what do we do? More shelters? More supportive housing? Better treatment for those with psychiatric diagnoses? As I said before, I'm not a policy expert, and we will need to work together to figure it out. But for now, on Shabbat, let's simply take a moment to pause and to allow our tradition to remind us of who we want to be as we turn toward moving toward a solution. The lesson of leaving a sheaf behind in the field or returning the garment of a poor person who has offered it in pawn is that when we have a choice, we who are in a relative position of plenty should exercise compassion toward those who are not. As we move through these uncertain days to come, let's remember this. When we're fearful or angry, let's be careful with the words we use, because we know that words have the power to create and destroy. And let us refrain from punishing those whose need is the symptom of the problem and not its cause. Of course, we must look out for ourselves and our families, but when we have a choice, and we almost always have a choice, let us also extend our care and compassion to the strangers and neighbors who need it most.